Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Fabricia Fellowship webinar. My name is Richard Hallam, and I'm the Deputy Head of Junior School at Jeradong International School in Brunei, and I'm also a member of the Executive Committee for PD for Fabricia. So the Fabricia Fellowship Programme represents one of the most exciting professional development opportunities available to educators across our region. The programmes continue to nurture outstanding middle and senior leaders, offering fellows, amongst other things, dedicated mentoring from experienced senior leaders from across the Fabricia community, and also the opportunity to present their work at the Fabricia Leadership Conference, which Kerry did in November 2025. It is a program that truly invests in the people who shape the future of our schools. So today, we're delighted to showcase one of those fellows. Kerry Moore is Assistant Head at Stonyhurst International School, Penang, and her work this year has centered on something that sits at the very heart of great teaching and learning, which is metacognition. This is widely regarded as one of the highest impact strategies we have in education, but embedding it meaningfully, not just in individual classrooms, but across an entire school culture, is a real and complex challenge. In her presentation, From Classrooms to Culture, Embedding Metacognition Across Our Schools, Kerry will share the strategies her school has implemented, what has worked, what has been learnt, and where the journey goes next. So without further ado, over to Kerry Moore.
Thank you so much, Richard. And welcome everyone to this webinar, From Classroom to Culture, Embedding Metacognition Across Our School. So I'll give you a little bit of background about our school. We're a relatively new school. I think we are in our fourth year of operation at the moment. So we started in 2022 with nursery to year 9, and now we have had our first cohort of IGCSE students go through last year, and we launched our sixth form centre this year. So it's been quite busy. In terms of my background, I started teaching in 2001. Some of you were probably very young at the time. And I started teaching in the UK, so I worked there for about 17 years. My subject is French, my main subject is French, and I've also taught Spanish and Italian. And dubiously, I taught a year of German as well, which I still don't understand how that came about. And since then, I moved to Egypt and worked at Malvern College, Egypt, where I was an assistant head. And now, obviously, I'm here. I joined in 2022 when it first opened, and I'm also an assistant head. So let's start right from the beginning. So I began this work firstly by identifying a specific need that we had within our school context. So despite some sort of strong attainment profiles, a number of our higher learning potential pupils were not actually achieving the potential that they should have been able to achieve. So through discussion, observation, we did a little bit of learning analysis, we recognized that many of these pupils, whilst having these strong learning profiles or attainment profiles, didn't really know how they could learn best. And they also hadn't quite developed those self-regulation attitudes, like motivation, learning to sort of adapt and so on. So whilst they had potential, they weren't achieving their potential. And then I did a little bit of research, and in particular, I was looking at the teaching and learning toolkit on the Education Endowment Foundation website. And actually, what stood out the most and what clearly had became the strongest contender was embedding metacognition and self-regulated learning. So it really felt like this would address our need. And then, when you look further into it, actually, it would address the needs for EAL pupils and AEN pupils. And actually, if you look even further, it's something that will have a positive impact on all the pupils in the school. So it really was a win-win situation. So how did we implement it? Because this is a big question. It's not about understanding what metacognition is, but it's about how you implement it across the school. So embedding metacognition is a long-term process. It's not a quick initiative. And we did use the EEF implementation guidance of explore, prepare, deliver, and sustain, because we recognize that meaningful implementation takes time, and it takes planning, and it takes reflection. So it's not just a strategy that you can, pop into a couple of lessons and that's it. You're now an excellent metacognitive teacher. It's something that needs to be sort of woven into the whole school fabric and become part of the school culture. And also it's important to understand that implementing something like this is something that will take probably between 2 to 4 years. So all of these big approaches that you want to implement are a long-term project. So actually what we're doing today is we're having a little look at where we are, or sharing our story so far, and looking at what we've trialed, what's worked, what hasn't worked so well, and basically what our next steps are going to be. So first, I want to take a little look at your own school context and experiences. So I'd love to get a sense of where you all are in terms of metacognition and self-regulated learning. Is it something that you're just thinking about? Is it something that's fully embedded in your schools? So here's your first question. So your first sort of these statements, if you could use this scale underneath, which says strongly agree, disagree, or strongly agree, and put yourself where you think you are at the moment, or where your school is in terms of metacognition. I'm going to move on to the next slide in about 10 seconds. But it's interesting to see how I think the one that comes across as being the weakest, as it were, or the one requiring improvement, is that metacognition is part of everyday teaching. So I think it's true that these sort of things will be spoken about, will be used in certain lessons, but isn't necessarily a part of everyday teaching. Okay, the next one. So how visible is metacognition in your school? Very positive, where it says across most lessons. Okay, it's great to see that actually half of those who've responded say that it's visible across most lessons. It's brilliant. I'm going to move on to the next one, last one. So what do you think would help most to ensure that metacognition becomes more embedded? Very interesting to see that the shared language is really high up on that list. And I think that's absolutely right. It's so important. So I'm going to move on from there. Thank you so much. It's really interesting to see all of the results. Okay, mustn't show you the answers. I'm now going to like to find out a little bit about you and how metacognitive you are as learners. So you can have a little test. I'm going to read to you a list of 12 words, and you need to try and retain and remember as many of the words as you can without writing any down, without noting it down in any form. So I'm going to start reading them out to you, and then in a minute, you'll try and remember as many as you can. Okay, you all focused? Apple, train, candle, river, tiger, pillow, guitar, mountain, key, chocolate, mirror, bicycle. Okay, so now very quickly, try to remember as many of those as you can. So try to read out loud what you can remember. And then in the chat, write down how many you remembered. And if you used a particular strategy, can you please write down what that strategy was? 12, I read out 12. Visualized, okay, great. Created a story, a picture, brilliant. Oh, you're all too good at this. Okay, brilliant. Now I'm going to show you the words. There they are on the screen. I'm now going to show you some of the strategies that you might have used to try to remember those words. So I think some of them, yeah, so somebody said visualize, so that's up there as well. I visualize the stories. And somebody else mentioned creating a story, linking the words together. I was going to try it out on you again, but I think I'm taking up too much time with this. But it is, so I won't go do it again, but it is really interesting to see that how quickly you use strategies, you monitored what was working, you adapted in real time. And that's exactly what metacognition is. And the important thing is that we've got to make sure that we're signposting these things to the children. So it's okay, right. So what is metacognition exactly, and what is self-regulation? So we often refer to metacognition as thinking about thinking. And it's the learner's ability to recognize, reflect on, and direct their own thinking and learning processes. Self-regulation is broader. It involves managing their emotions, behaviors, motivation, in order to work towards a sort of their goal effectively. So self-regulated learners use metacognitive strategies to guide their learning. So they plan, they monitor, they adapt, but they also manage their focus, their persistence, their motivation and behavior throughout the learning process, which is actually the sort of what we had noticed about some of our high learning potential pupils. They weren't quite managing their motivations, their persistence in trying to achieve the best they could. So if, for example, if we think about, let's say, a pupil who's revising for a French spelling test, obviously French, and they're struggling to remember the words, so they think of a strategy such as look, cover, write, check, and that's fine, they work on that, but they also know, they've been told by their teacher many times that to revise regularly, so little and often, is actually probably the best way to do it, but they really don't want to do that. So where we want the change is where we want them to think, okay, I really don't want to do that. However, I know that's the best way. And they actually push themselves and motivate themselves to do revising it a little every day. When the pupils get to a stage where they do that independently and they recognize what's going to help them the best, then that's where we've truly managed to achieve that self-regulation. The impact of metacognition and self-regulation approaches is really high. So the EEF suggests that it will offer 8 months additional progress over the course of the year, which is such an important figure. So when thinking about how to embed metacognition across a school, it's not just about a single sort of strategy or teaching strategy, but it's something that needs to be introduced across the whole school. It's a whole school culture that values thinking and learning. So we need to think about the culture, develop teachers' capability and confidence to teach these approaches, and also creating a coherence to ensure that it's sort of systemically sustained across the whole school. And we felt that this wider approach was actually particularly important within the international school context, where there is often a greater mobility of staff and pupils. And what we don't want to happen is that, you have a few classrooms where this strategy is used quite frequently, but then as soon as that teacher leaves, that strategy goes with it. So it's something that needs to be sort of woven into the fabric of the school. So building the culture to start with is an important starting point. So before metacognition can become embedded into the classrooms, students and staff need to see the thinking and reflection and learning habits as sort of a normal part of school life. So the culture of metacognition, even though it feels like it's its own standalone heading, actually weaves into also capability and coherence. But first, let's start with what we started off with. We did launch a couple of assemblies at school. So we explained what metacognition was. We explained how they could use some strategies in their homework. A few weeks later, one of our colleagues also talked about the planning stage of metacognition. He used a really good example about planning a holiday to Bali. He said, you can't just turn up to the airport and just hope to get on a flight. And then when you land, hope to get into a hotel, hope you've bought the right currency and the right clothing for that place. So it was a really good, relevant way of making the children understand how important the planning part of whatever you're doing is really valid. The other thing we did was we started trying to think about the language. We wanted to share the correct language. So we created these displays, but they haven't actually been rolled out yet. So we had a staff working group and we have been using them, trialing them ourselves. And so it's not been rolled out. We want to roll it out next year. As I said, this is still, it is a journey, but hopefully it's something that once it's been finalized, and we think it needs to be adapted a little bit because it doesn't necessarily suit certain subjects or certain year groups lower down in the year. So do we streamline the wording? Do we have different ones for each different area? So these are things that we're still discussing. And thirdly, once a term, we have like a celebration assembly for our pupils. And the awards are linked to different subjects, but they are very closely linked to our school values and also our approaches to learning. And we have now included the Reflective Learner Award, which is clearly an award aimed at the pupils who are very good at planning their work, very good at monitoring their progress, at self-assessing, and then at evaluating what they've done. So these are just some of the things that we are doing to try and, push the culture of metacognition. And then obviously one of the most important sides of this is the capability. So once we've started building awareness and culture, we need to make sure that actually teachers feel confident and able to embed these practices into their teaching. So first, in terms of, again, talking about the language, one of the first things we did was we changed the wording of our marking and feedback policy. This is important because it aligns sort of our feedback practices with our wider goal of developing more independent and reflective learners. It also makes it feel much more permanent as well. So, and as it stands, our marking and feedback policy actually aligns itself really well with metacognition, which is, across the board, I'm sure this is the same. We try to offer lots of opportunities for people to reflect on their learning and respond to feedback. Next, we also included metacognitive sort of areas. So like, are pupils being encouraged to reflect on how they learn? Are they being questioned? Is the questioning supporting pupils in their planning or their thinking? And whilst this was a part of the Learning Walk focus, it wasn't a compliance exercise at all. It was more of a, let's celebrate what is good in the lessons. Let's pinpoint the things that actually are working really well. And mainly it was actually looking at the pupils rather than the teachers. So we were looking at how are the pupils looking back over their work? Are they thinking about how they're going to approach a task, or are they going straight to the teacher? Are they asking questions? And very much at the very start of the year, we also, during our induction week, we had obviously introduced our sort of CPD focuses, and metacognition and self-regulated learning is one of the four. We also have literacy across the curriculum, and I think that's something that will always remain as one of our a very big focus, because obviously we work in international schools and we have a lot of different nationalities to sort of contend with. Learning to live well and adaptive inclusive teaching and metacognition. We also did, during that period, we did a spotlight on metacognition and self-regulated learning. So once again, that was during the induction week, so that staff had a good understanding. There was a real, so they realized what it was we were focusing on and helped them with further CPD that we would be offering. And lastly, we used the Great Teaching Toolkit CPD platform to give staff the opportunity to not only understand what metacognition is, but also understand why metacognition and self-regulated learning are important. So learning about the why, and it also gives you opportunity to try out some strategies. So the why and the how. One of the most effective things we did, which was very recent actually, is, the finale was very recent, but we have been trying to ensure that within teams, because the GTT, the teachers work in teams, that they had opportunities to meet and, have that sort of professional dialogue about teaching and learning on a regular basis. And then at the end of the year, so just recently, we had an end of term teaching and learning celebration, and every team had to present, they had 2 minutes to present on the strategies they had trialed and what went well, the impact that it would have had on the pupils, and what was really encouraging. So each team had to select one of the four foci, the four CPD focuses, and actually 10 out of the 20, so half of them all chose metacognition, which was really powerful to see that they were really engaged in wanting to get metacognition going. What was really important is that, that metacognition wasn't anymore just at, SLT leadership meetings. It wasn't just something that was being talked about. It was something that was being talked about within the teams, in the classrooms, and they could see the positive impact that it was having. It was also interesting to see, for example, let's say a year 5 classroom, how metacognition works compared to a year 11 science classroom, for example. So I think teachers appreciated how metacognition, or these strategies, could look very different from one subject or one year group to another. But as long as we have this idea that pupils are reflecting on their own learning and how they learn, that's the key thing we want them to be doing. And it's not going to look identical in every year group or in every classroom. So I think it was really good for staff to recognise that as well. And here you can see just some examples from some of the slides. And I think what we also learned from this is that teachers need actually repeated opportunities to reflect on the practice, to see examples in other areas, to trial different strategies, to discuss the impact, to refine their approach. You know, the most important thing is that teachers are learning and understand that they can experiment, that they can trial different things. Some things might work better than others, but it just keeps that professional dialogue going. And then the last sort of pillar was coherence. So making sure that metacognition became consistent across different parts of the school. So one example is in Year 6, they have a dedicated IPC unit on metacognition. We also recognise that parents need to be a part of this as well. So the language that parents use at home, we want that to replicate the sort of language and the information that we're sharing here. So we did have some sessions not related to metacognition, but for example, let's say recently we had the Year 6 to 7 transition evening, and within that presentation, I spoke about how they could use different ways of questioning to help their child with their homework. So instead of saying, "Oh, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do next," "Oh, go and ask your teacher," actually the parent, you know, we guided them on types of questions that they could ask to help them get out of that sort of rut of not understanding what was going on. So I think, again, it's another way of trying to make sure that there is that consistency across school, across all the stakeholders. We also developed the staff working party and a pupil working party, which were brilliant. So the staff working party, they trialed strategies, they did their own research, and they met at lunch times. It was a really, really exciting thing to witness. We have there, for example, a business studies teacher. She did some research on how the use of planning, monitoring, and evaluation affected different things, like different children in the group as well. And the pupil working party, they are currently planning a presentation to SLT about metacognition and the importance of it, and also planning a presentation to the Year 6 pupils who will be coming into Year 7 about how they can use, what tips and tricks they can use for how they approach tasks in class and also how they approach their homework. So getting the pupils involved as well has been really powerful. So then I wanted to look a little bit at, the impact. Has it had any impact? Has it had a positive impact? And this was interesting. So what we have noticed is the changes in pupil learning behaviours and the perception of teaching. So on the GTT site, there are actually these student surveys that you can give pupils, and you do these before you do the strategy and then after you've done the strategy. And what was really interesting is that all the staff who actually did use the student survey, if you look at some of them, statements include, for example, in this class, we use checklists or strategies to help us improve our work, or my teacher shows us how to plan our work. So you can see, I don't know if you can see, well, you can see where it's on the bottom right-hand picture, you can see the red box around each one. It shows the pre-trial results and the post-trial results. So you can see that in every single strand, there was an improvement. And bearing in mind that these assessments were done the surveys were done around October, November, and were probably done again in the past month. So it's a big chunk of time. So they won't remember the questions. They won't remember, half of them won't have remembered doing it. So to see this sort of increase, and you can see the math there, it went from 38% to 71%. So that's really visible evidence of the impact that it's had on the perception of teaching from the pupil's point of view and their own change in learning behaviours. Secondly, when we were doing our learning walks, we definitely saw a huge increase in metacognitive practices. So you could see at the top there, I think that was an EAL lesson. So they've been looking at how they can use teacher modeling, planning, monitoring, and evaluation, how they can use that to improve the pupil's ability to read a more challenging text. And then the other area where we've seen an impact is in the marking feedback. So when we did marking feedback, quality assurance in term one, we've seen a huge difference between term one and term two. And you can just see on the screen some of the ways in which they're using checklists, they're using opportunities for reflection. In the year 12 physics, you can see it says before the test, how did you revise? And then after the test, what went well? So then the idea is they refer back to it the next time they revise for a test, so that they remember, oh, actually last time this is what I did. It didn't work for me, so I'm going to try out this different way of learning. So those were the three main areas where we saw a really positive impact. So the story so far then is we started off by identifying a need, which was our higher learning potential pupils who were not achieving as well as they should. We decided to approach metacognition as a long-term whole school priority. We then wanted to embed metacognition. We focused on the three key areas: culture, capability, and coherence. And finally, we measured the impact. So you can see it's a really good little summary of what we've done so far and how it's gone for us. However, at the moment, we would say that we're still firmly within sort of the embedding. We're definitely not in the sustaining phase really yet. We're still in that initial part of the journey. We've established really strong foundations. We've shared language. We're growing staff confidence, increasing consistency in classroom practice. And there are early signs from the impact that I've told you about that it is impacting learning behaviours, which is exactly what we want. However, we also recognise that true embedding means that these approaches need to become like habitual. It needs to be something that happens all the time, consistent and self-sustaining across all classrooms and year groups. So now our focus is less about launching new initiatives or new strategies and more about refining practice, maintaining this momentum that we've started with, strengthening the consistency, and to continue to develop the pupil independence and self-regulation across the school. So what next? So as we've just seen the story so far, we're obviously reflecting what we've achieved so far. We've done the heavy lifting of introducing these concepts. So we're moving away from seeing metacognition as just little isolated pockets or isolated strategies, and we're moving towards making them a bit more embedded across everyday routines. So within the culture, the pillar of culture, we want to continue to share strong practice across teams. So still make this part of the professional dialogue, and also continue to the parental engagement so that we still have that link with home and school. In terms of capability, we want to make sure that metacognition is still a key focus next year and for years to come. It's not just something we're doing this year and we're going to let go of and then it will just disappear. We want to continue to strengthen pupil voice. So we do have things like the pupil council, we have house captains and so on. But what we want to try and build is more like a learning council, or pupils who are engaged in the learning and the teaching. And in terms of coherence, we definitely want to improve the consistency of the language across the classroom. So we've trialed a few things, but we now need to make sure that actually we're all using the same sort of words. Identify a smaller number of high impact metacognitive approaches. So we've trialed loads this year. Now it's a case of, deciding which ones are the ones that we really want to focus on. And then we want to try and build the metacognitive strategies into the curriculum routines. So, for example, as has already been happening a little bit, if you think about the assessments that the teams are doing, some of them have already started to engage with making it a much more reflective process, and the feedback they're giving is a much more reflective. Okay, so now I think I've come just about to the end, but I'm going to ask you to take one small step next week, preferably, if you're not on holiday. So on the screen, you have the three columns: culture, capability, and coherence. I've already put a couple of examples under each one. So if you can, I'm going to put in the chat in a second the link to this Padlet. And if you can go in there and under whichever heading you want, put in a little pledge, what it is that you will do next week or in the next couple of weeks to push that sort of metacognition forward.
Thank you, Kerry. While that's getting populated, maybe we can just go through some of these questions that we've got.
Yeah.
Okay, so first one is from Melanie. Did you have staff who felt they already know this, but when you got into lessons, it's clear that they don't? If you did, how did your numbers shift over the course of the year from start to the end in terms of metacognition being visible in the lessons?
I think so a lot of the things that we do are things that teachers do already. So we do already put things in place for pupils like scaffolding and things like that. But I think by explaining to staff that it's not that you're not already doing these things, it's the fact that it's not being made explicit to the children. That's the difference. And when you put it like that, a lot of the staff really understood that it was that was the issue. It was the fact that the children, you're doing it for them, but actually you're not helping them because they don't know why you're doing that. They don't understand that by having that, they can then achieve this. And I think by putting it in that way, they realize that it wasn't a criticism at all. This is not a criticism of anyone's teaching. It's more a sort of look at how pupils receive it and how pupils engage with it.
Thank you. And another one from Amrith. What survey type was this under the Great Teacher Toolkit? Am I right in saying it was an element one that you showed?
Yes, it was element 1 and it was 4.6 activating.
Okay, thank you. And from Karachi, how might one manage this in a different school with different development goal targets so it doesn't become a nice to have? How do we move it from being more user-friendly in a busy school system?
Well, I think, like we've seen here, it's about making sure that it isn't just a standalone strategy that you're incorporating into your own lessons. It's something that needs to be school-wide. It needs to be something that the SLT need to be promoting and supporting across the board. Like we said, it's actually, it's not an expensive way of improving teaching and learning, or rather improving the learning of pupils. It's a very cost-effective method. So that should encourage any SLT team to go for it.
I think so. And another one from Melanie. Which metacognitive strategies were picked up most readily by staff across early adopters and those reluctant to move in that direction?
The one that, strangely, in senior school, the one that I thought was quite strange, but the one that stood out the most was Think Alouds. That was the most popular one. I think because it's a relatively easy one to do. But it's generally something that's used more in junior school, isn't it? A Think Aloud. So it was quite interesting. It was interesting. That was the one that came out the most.
Thank you very much. And I can see from the comments already that there is a lot of appreciation for what you've been saying, Carrie, and talking about your journey.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for giving me this.
Full of metacognition, it says as well. So the last thing I need to say is thank you so much, Carrie. I look forward to hearing how your journey progresses with metacognition, and I wish you every success. So thank you very much, Carrie Moore.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Swati.